Welcome to the JB Media Institute Digital Drop-In. My name is Sarah Benoit, and I'm the co-founder and lead instructor of the JB Media Institute, and I'm here today with my co-founder, Justin Bellamy.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So today I can see we've got a few more people joining, so welcome everyone. I want to encourage you as we go along. Today is really going to be a conversation. So I know most of you are used to slide decks and presentations as part of our digital drop-in, but this month I wanted to just invite Justin to kind of talk with me about the lessons we've learned as entrepreneurs and to hopefully share that with all of you, some of the key things that we have, I think really worked on, especially over the last year. But as most of you know, Justin and I have been in business for quite a while now, both of us. So I feel like not only was last year kind of an opportunity, I think, to really go back over all those lessons I've learned and apply them to different situations. But I feel like last year I also had some time to just reflect on where we're at and where we're going and to really think about the future. And so even though I know we're sort of taking some time to step outside of our normal marketing conversations, I felt like this was a really important conversation to have. So as we're going through, please feel free to share any questions in the Q&A. Also feel free to share any information in the chat as well. And I want to encourage everyone in the chat to introduce yourself to the rest of the attendees, maybe share your website or your social media links if you're comfortable. And let's take this time actually to just sort of network together. But like I said, today we're just going to have a conversation, and I'd be interested in any input any of you have about the topics that we're going to discuss today. But I want to start by inviting Justin to just give everybody a quick overview of your entrepreneurial journey or story.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, there's a part of it that goes even before I started my the agency, which I won't go into because I want to make sure we have time for your other questions. But I was involved in some entrepreneurial ideas and projects when I was a young child, and that continued through high school and college. And then what happened before starting JB Media Group is I'd actually, in college, I started an informational website about Asheville called ashevillenow.com. And I started it as a project in school with the intention of making it a business, basically focusing my the last 2 years of my college education on skills, resources, and actually putting in some time in terms of my senior project and things like that on that website, Asheville Now. And then as that was winding down, as I worked on that for about 6 years, put a lot of time and energy into it, but it wasn't achieving financial stability or success. I just mentally decided to sort of shelve it and focus more on making money because I had been struggling financially because I was putting so much time into a business that wasn't making any money in 2009. And then I started focusing on doing marketing, which is what I was doing for my own business. I was trying to do marketing as a service, as a freelancer in 2009. And about 2 years into doing that, I was really busy, and actually I was outsourcing some things to Sarah at the time, having basically some work I wasn't very good at that I was hired to do. I hired Sarah to do for one of my clients, and that was really busy, was finally making a reasonable amount of money for the first time in my life, but was getting close to being burnt out. And that's when I had a choice to make, a big choice. I had several clients, at least 3 or 4 clients, who indicated that they would like to hire me full time. And 2 of them I was basically working for half-time. And then so I was basically working 2 half-time jobs and then 5 or 6 other clients. So I was working about 80 hours a week and making pretty good money. Even by today's standards, I still, that fall 2010, I made more money than I've really made any time since then until relatively recently. And then, so I decided between working for one of my clients, and I had a couple of non-clients that had job openings that I was interested in, or turning my freelance business into an agency. So I chose the second choice, the entrepreneurial path. And so talked to Sarah about joining JB Media, talked to other people I knew in the community, started putting together like lists of potential team members for the company, looking for places to have the office. So I opened got a space at Mojo Co-working, opened the office about 6 months after I made the official decision to do so. Then we've just grown the agency since then. I won't go into all the details, but we've expanded beyond West North Carolina, and we focus on tourism, we focus on social impact, we focus on health and wellness, and we are this year for the first time the agency should be over $1 million in revenue, and then we added we brought Sarah on board as in a dual role, which included training, and over time it focused more and more on training. And then we launched the JB Media Institute as a spinoff over a couple of years between 2013 and 2015. Really summarizing a lot of hard work and a lot of things we did together during that time period. And then in 2018, I learned that Romantic Asheville was for sale, and it was a similar business to my first business that I started in college. It was sort of my friendliest competitor and the site I liked the most that I was competing with at the time, the one that sort of achieved a part of my vision really successfully. So I always had an interest in buying it if and when the owner retired, and he reached out to me. We had a dialogue going already about that, and he reached out to me, and I put together an investor to buy the site. So now we run, I lead the strategy. We just had our 2-hour quarterly strategic planning meeting for that business before this call. That went really well. So we've got a good plan for the next 3 months for that business. We just had our quarterly on Monday for the Institute to plan out the next 3 months of Institute work. And then the agency just had our quarterly last week to plot out what we're planning for the next quarter for the agency. So right now it's 3 companies. The total revenue close to $2 million, but with the Romantic Asheville, we're a minority owner. We have a major investor who receives most of the profits from that, and we're looking at possibly rearranging that a little bit as well if we can buy more of that business over time.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. First, I just want to say a big high five on the agency crossing over that $1 million level, which I think is a big accomplishment. We're going to talk about.
We aren't there yet. But the first quarter we're basically around $250,000, and so we're on track to be very close.
Yeah, that's really exciting though, because like I said, I know we're going to talk about growth in just a minute, but I think growth in business is such a huge, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of strategy. It takes a lot of energy when you're doing that type of thing, especially when you've got multiple growing companies. So I just want to share with everyone, my entrepreneurial journey, I think, is really different than Justin's, which has made us, I think, work together well. I accidentally met my first business partner at a vegetarian restaurant in Boone, North Carolina, while I was at a Laurie Anderson concert. And I always call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I had no idea I would be a business owner. It wasn't really on my vision to even consider it until I was in my late 20s. And when I met her, I knew that I was going to get laid off from my corporate job. And so we started having these conversations, and she really encouraged me to think about working for myself. She'd been working for herself for about 10 years. And she just kind of inspired me to start considering things I'd never considered. And so when I got laid off from my corporate job, I took that opportunity in that first year where I had unemployment to launch my first company. And that company ran for 7 years. And then when my business partner left the business, I went ahead and rebranded and kept going on my own. And then it wasn't too long after that Justin approached me about collaborating, which was really awesome because I was pretty lonely at that point after having somebody to work with regularly and then kind of being on my own. So, I think it's amazing how so many of us come to this place from different backgrounds and different motivations and things like that. I'm curious, Justin, if you could just add to your story, what was the main thing that motivated you to just leap off into really working for yourself? Was there one thing that motivated you, or was there a moment where you remember kind of taking that leap?
Yeah, it's a couple things. My parents were both entrepreneurs. There was periods of time when they worked for companies, but they were kind of entrepreneurial even within that. They ran the EOS office for an international company where they were the only employees in the United States. They had their own office. They had their own hours, completely different time schedule than the corporate office in Japan. Before and after that, they were doing even more entrepreneurial things. So I was experienced what it was like to be around entrepreneurs. Both of my parents were entrepreneurial. My father's father and my mother's father were both entrepreneurs as well. Not that they had a lot of influence on me, but it was just sort of a series of, it's a family trend, or I guess history we have. And then we grew up without an abundance. We weren't necessarily really, we weren't hard off, but we also didn't have an abundance. And so there was I was motivated to make my own money from my childhood. And I was given opportunities to as well, which I think was important in me building up my entrepreneurial creativity and capacity. Was that like, there's certain things I wanted as a child to buy that the family wouldn't buy for me, but they technically could afford it, but they chose to set a limit that was below that for what I could get for major gifts and things like that. So I set out to make my own money to buy the things I wanted, which was the initial impetus. First I bought a go-kart, later I bought my own expensive computer in high school. And then when I was in late high school, early college, my parents got laid off from that company. And there was a financial stress and crisis in my family that initially inspired me to see if I could start a business that would help support the whole family, and that was a lot to take on mentally. And there's still some, like, not necessarily all positive, ramifications of that mindset. Feeling or some responsibility for supporting the family, even though I never actually did. I've never actually given any money back to my parents at this stage. I had a goal for a while to be able to do that. And then when I went to college and I studied computer science, and I had this dual opportunity track. Once was like certain mentors and certain people I admired had IT jobs that were sort of corporate and small and mid-sized businesses. And I thought, I'm either going to do that, like my mentor in high school, my mentor in college, or I would do something on my own. And it wasn't necessarily originally, I had various things I considered doing on my own. So when I was in college, I had the idea to start Asheville Now. And I thought it was a good opportunity to, like, I had to do student projects, so I might as well do something that would maybe be something after I graduated. That was my mindset, which I think was relatively unique at my university. I know in certain universities it's really popular and common, but at UNC Asheville, it wasn't very common to think that way. So I was, basically trying to start my business as an outgrowth of my educational experience. And then when Asheville Now didn't work, the way I could make money most quickly was, I was already doing a couple of projects, retainer type of projects, was to just sell more of that to make an income to basically have a living wage in Asheville. So I did that first. And then when that got to be too much to handle, and I finally was saving some money, and then I had a choice, like I said before, and it wasn't a clear choice. I pretty strongly considered some of the job offers that I had, but I chose to start my, and there was I had a phone call with another consultant on one of my clients, who was a older guy who had his own PR firm, was very successful in San Francisco. And when I was explaining to him all that I was doing and all the opportunities that I had, how busy I was, he asked me, he said, why don't you just start up your own company? And prior to that, I had thought about starting up a web development company, but it was really competitive in Asheville. And I was like, I don't want to be in that competitive industry. So I chose to do my own website. It was going to be the revenue was going to come from advertising, and that didn't work. So then when I went into freelance business, when I got to the point where I'm like, maybe there's a new niche that isn't really competitive yet, which is digital marketing as a service. There was already marketing agency, but most of them weren't very good at digital yet at the time. So I was like, maybe I can carve out a specialist agency that just does digital. And it was coming out of the backside of the 2008 recession, and I saw opportunity. I was like, okay, there's like, the economy is starting to improve. People need help. And I came up with a business model that was pretty standard for agencies, but it was also a little bit different.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because I love listening to you talk about just what motivated you. It's funny because I feel like my last corporate job was basically in 2003. And, I had an opportunity at that point to make a decision to get another job or embark on this new journey and try it out. And, I think I was pretty simple, right? Like my main motivation was I didn't want to have to ask anybody for vacation time anymore. And I really didn't like working in the corporate world back then because when I was in the corporate world, I still had to cover up all my tattoos, right? I still had to meet this standard that I didn't really like meeting. And so it really motivated me on the inside to figure out how I could really take that leap into entrepreneurship because those things were just so important to me. Being able to be myself, being able to travel freely and work from anywhere, those things became really top priorities. So they were a huge amount of my motivation. And I was lucky enough, like I said, to have a first business partner that really inspired me. I had in my corporate job realized that I was very technical and that I could handle a lot of technology and do well with it. So I was able to go from being more of a writer, being more of a traditional marketing person, customer service person, to take that leap into search engine optimization, which was a big difference. So we've got a few questions coming in. Thanks so much for these, Trey. I want to sort of frame them in relationship to some of the other questions we've got here. So the first question from Trey is about the 3 companies you're running. I will just say it's romanticasheville.com is the company, the third one that you don't know about, or maybe haven't been aware that Justin's involved in that business now. So it's just romanticasheville.com. It's a website that's been around for quite a while. And I will just answer quickly that the JB Media Agency, JB Media Group, JB Media Institute, which is the school that I help run, and Romantic Asheville all actually do have their own staff members. So we do have one unified team that does work together, and we do cross-pollinate between the companies quite a bit. But, we do have separate staff for each one of those businesses. So Justin, what I'd like you to share a little bit is my next question was about, how are you approaching growth with your companies and thinking about the future, especially since I think all of us know the future got a little bit like tossed up last year. And just, I don't think we need too many like specifics, but more just like the internal approach of like, how are you really approaching the growth of these 3 companies? How do they support each other in growth? That's a question Trey has. Are they synergized or not? And can you talk a little bit about that, how they're all growing and what's the synergy between the 3?
Yeah, I mean, I could spend an hour on that question, but I'll try to keep it brief. There definitely is a synergy and it's intentional. We do also share resources. We share the office. We share some tools, like research tools and marketing tools that we use. And we share a leadership team. We use EOS, the Entrepreneurship Operating System, as a framework for managing companies. And EOS suggests you have a leadership team. And the leadership team is made up right now of 5 people. It was just 2 at first, and then it was 3, and then it was 4, and now it's 5. The 5 are me. We have HR and culture. We have business systems, which also touches project management. We have integration, which is basically how everything fits together. It's kind of operations, but it's more than operations. It's more like implementing my vision. I'm visionary CEO of all 3. So the leadership team spans all 3. So HR policies for all 3, business systems for all 3. Oh, there's finance. The last one was finance. So we have finance on the leadership team. It's a separate person. And for a while, I was in charge of sales and strategy and vision, and we had someone else in charge of HR, finance, and operations, and just 2 of us. And then we added business systems, and then our operations person left, and we elevated 3 internal people into 3 different roles, those 3 different parts of her role. So now we have 5. So just like we have the integrator and I attend all of the meetings for all the companies, and then the finance and the systems and HR kind of just drop in or have their own meetings those individual companies as needed. And that was working fairly well. And the money flows, I'm not going to get into details about how the money flows, but the agency owns part of the other companies. They have separate payrolls, and it's working fairly well right now, to have it that way. There is synergies intentionally, and that's a question I could spend a lot of time on, but I'll point out some obvious ones. The agency's 3 focus areas, tourism, impact, and health and wellness, overlap with one of the Institute's main focuses, which is training for tourism. And then romanticasheville.com is the #1 tourism website for Western North Carolina, with over 6 million visitors last year. So where the overlaps are we have about 400 customers in Romantic Asheville, which are all small businesses in tourism. They need training, so we can promote the training offerings we have to them. And some of them need marketing. So especially the larger ones, we can provide marketing services for them for the agency. So that is that's one of the main synergies, is tourism as a industry touches all 3. And we're starting to do some work, thinking about ways to do training for the social impact and nonprofit sector. We've always done some. We're trying to do more of that to create another synergy between the agency and the Institute. But that's the main one, the synergy of one industry that we're strong in regionally, for all 3 companies. And there's ways that could expand even beyond the region, but it's primarily a regional focus right now. For all 3 companies, we do some services and some training for tourism outside of Western North Carolina, but Romantic Asheville obviously is only touching about 100 miles around Asheville.
Yeah, and I wanted to let everybody know in the chat, I shared a link. If you want to just learn more about the EOS system that Justin's talking about, it is a really fascinating system for entrepreneurs that I think just, at least for me, as being part of that system now, has really helped me, I think, organize my brain in some ways. And I do want to just give you a shout out that one of the things I appreciate most about working with you is that sort of cultural connection that all the companies have. The company culture that you've built has really spanned all 3. And I think that makes a big difference in the synergy that Trey's asking about, right? So the companies are synergistic, but a lot of that is true because we have all sort of come together and agreed to the same core values of how we work together and how we interact with our different clientele. And, that I know, at least for me last year, was really important because as things got stressful or difficult, or there were things we just couldn't plan for, being surrounded by multiple teams of people where it felt like we could all really sort of values show up for each other during a hard time was super, super valuable. So that kind of leads me into the next question, which is, company culture, I think, has a lot to do with how entrepreneurs themselves are growing personally through the process of building their companies. So even though the culture eventually incorporates everyone else and everyone else participates in it, a lot of times the vision is seeded from the person who started the business. So, what are some of the main, top ways that you feel like in this process of running all these different businesses, especially in the last 10 years, what are some of the main ways that you feel like you've really grown as a person?
Thank you, Sarah. Before I get to that, I want to touch on 2 other things real quickly. One, Trey just mentioned an EOS facilitator in Western North Carolina. That's the same person we use. Matthew Abrams is we were his first client for EOS, and we have consistently been a client of his since, I think it's coming up on 4 years now, that we've been using EOS and Matthew as our facilitator. And then I don't feel like I completely answered your question before about growth mindset. So I want to touch on that briefly before getting to your latest question. Partially because I'm actually in the shift in my mindset right now. And the shift in my mindset is driven by a couple of things. It's driven largely by recently becoming a father and recognizing a pattern and a cycle of myself of taking on really big projects that eat up all of my time, and that not being healthy for my relationship with my wife or being able to be a present father. So I'm starting to shift my mindset right now around what I'm focusing on, to be more focusing on improving the existing businesses and refining systems for more efficiency and profitability, and delegating like more of the necessary scaling pieces to others, including potentially hiring more people to help as we can afford to, rather than taking on big, shiny, ambitious growth strategy pieces myself. Now, I also recognize, I think I need to recognize that, starting the Institute was a big project. It was mostly Sarah did most of the work, but it was a lot of work for me too. And we have more synergy and more like balance because we have that entity. Buying Romantic Asheville was a massive project for me and our director of operations at the time. It ate up a massive amount of time. It took energy away from my family and other businesses. But I did it because I thought it would be a really valuable asset for the company and for myself long term. And it's panning out so far to be exactly what I thought it would be. I wrote a business plan and we're hitting every mark, every goal, and every benchmark of that business plan pretty well. So it was, in my mind, I can somewhat justify that, but there's often been an unhealthy balance in my life of working too much, which is taken away from friends, family, my relationship with my wife, and other things. And I'm committing right now because I just finished the big project that I designed. It was a big virtual conference that I led last month. That took 6 months of work and a lot of work for about 2 months, where I again got out of balance and was exhausted and working too many hours and not present enough. And to recognize that I created that. I chose that. I designed that event. I committed to making it as big as it was, and I pushed myself to make it successful to the point of nearly burning out. Same thing happened last summer. We did a big pivot project for a client and took on a massive new project that was also similarly intense for me and even more intense for other team members. Last year, we burned out a couple people on a big virtual event last summer, to the point of unhealthy work-life balance for about 4 or 5 team members. It was in the middle of COVID, it just felt like we had to do. Now we've gotten on the other side of it, and I'm seeing more stability across the entities and focusing, on more balance. We have balance as a core value, but I think in some ways I have more balance than some entrepreneurs. That's not a good enough for me. That's no longer good enough. Just because I'm more balanced than some of my peers that I have peer groups with, and that I can point to people who are more workaholic than me is no longer a good enough excuse to work as hard as I have. And I feel like putting in 10 years of really hard work and putting a lot of sacrifices to grow what I have, I can take the foot off the gas a little bit. And more so, it's not like it'll stop. The engine's not going to, the momentum isn't going to stop if I stop taking on big, ambitious new entrepreneurial projects within the companies. And so to get to your last question, Sarah, I've done a number of things myself as a leader and over the years. The first was when I started the company. I was already doing some personal work at the time around my own issues with codependency and other personal emotional stuff. I was doing that outside of work, and I've continued to do some of that over the years. And some of that work actually has helped me with my business stuff. I'll give one specific example. But then on leadership and building the right culture, I started with Leadership Asheville. I attended that my first year in business. And then subsequently, I sponsored team members, including you, Sarah, and others, 4 or 5 others, to do that every year for the next few years. Then I attended Leadership North Carolina, which was a 9-month program across the state to build up my leadership skills. And that sort of opened the door for us to become a B Corp based on one of the keynote lectures I attended during that. And sort of our pivot towards social impact came somewhat out of that program. After that, I attended a couple of social impact oriented leadership programs, including Starting Block, which I attended in New Orleans, and Hive Global Leaders, which I attended on the Harvard campus in Massachusetts. It's a program that's typically associated with their West Coast offices, but they did a couple of 5-day programs on the East Coast. I think you attended following year, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
So I've had the history of attending programs and then sponsoring team members, partners to do them, as professional development, which I think builds skill set across the company. I've had sponsored 3 other people to do Starting Block when they launched their Raleigh, North Carolina program. It was a little easier to get to and more accessible. And I volunteered there to get some discount for the team. So those programs have helped me build my mindset around social entrepreneurship and impact, and new skill sets around empathy and new styles of leadership that I think are modern within the context of that. And then this past year, I designed my own conference that I wouldn't say it's my own, but I came up with a concept for a virtual conference that was called Shift. It was about shifting your mindset, shifting your business, and shifting systems towards social impact, towards racial justice and environmental justice. And that's the project I just mentioned. It was a beast, and it wore me out, but it was also professional development in the fact that we curated some sessions about leadership, about a lot of topics that were really important. And I chose the sessions I wanted to attend, and I also assigned team members to moderate and technically host sessions that I thought they would benefit from most, and spread the team across 6 team members across all of the 40 sessions that we curated for that event. And I think it was professional development for everyone, and both in stretching their skill set to do technical support for an event, but also maybe picking up a few things from the sessions that they were involved with.
Yeah, and I just want to say to you, after the 10 years that you and I have worked together, I always really appreciate how intentional you have been about the personal development part of just being a professional. I feel like there's a lot of companies that don't always invest that much, not just not just business owners. We don't always invest in ourselves, but I think especially once you're building larger company teams, you really have to figure out ways to help people take those steps to keep improving upon their skill sets. And skill sets include not just being able to produce the work, but being able to interact with clients, interact with students, interact with your own team members. So I know for me, that's something that, personally as an entrepreneur, some of the main things that have really, really, I think just changed in my life is one, I remember years ago when you and I and the team were reading Crucial Conversations. I remember in that book, they talk about how when you are approaching people with ideas or even criticism, that you approach the conversation tentatively. And I remember as I read that, I started laughing because I was like, I don't think I've ever done anything tentatively. As a matter of fact, I should probably look up the meaning of that word and think about that a little bit. But that's like one of those things where I really learned, even though I'm strong and opinionated and I have lots of ideas, and over the course of my career, I've gotten really used to working with clients and students and getting criticized myself. And I feel really comfortable in that world. Not everyone is as comfortable. I'm very extroverted. Sometimes I work with creative people that are more introverted. So one of the biggest changes for me was really just understanding myself on a deeper level, and how I sort of communicate and how I share information with people, and then really spending some time learning how other people do it so that it would be less confusing for me sometimes when I was communicating stuff and maybe it didn't go over well, because I'm usually moving fast. I've got a lot on my plate. I speak very bluntly. I'm from New Jersey, so I feel like I have this mode where I get into Jersey mode. And so sometimes after becoming a 21-year Southerner at this point, I've had to really learn how to just shift that communication. But it takes the self-awareness, right? And really understanding how you operate and then really listening to other people. I also think as an entrepreneur, one of the beautiful things that comes out of running your own businesses and taking your ideas and putting them into action is you really learn to value yourself and you learn to value other people. So, because you can't do one without the other. So I've really, I think over the years, become more confident in my abilities. I feel more confident in speaking out my opinions. I feel more able to discern when is a good time to push the envelope and challenge myself, and when is a good time to be gentle and take a breath, right? Like, I feel like that's something where I was with another entrepreneur the other night who's a friend of mine, and she was saying, I'm a workaholic and I love it, and I was like, I'm not using that word anymore because that word has some connotations around it that I would like to let go of. So I'm not trying to embrace workaholism, right? I'm trying to do the same, which is figure out, how do I have time for the things that matter? How do I work at a pace that's super healthy, right? So that my physical health, but also my creativity doesn't suffer. So I wanted to touch on something as we're talking about this from Trey again. Trey loved your reference to mentors. And this is something, Trey, I just want to say that Justin really, I had never really thought about it until we met. And he had some great mentors that were helping him. And I just felt really encouraged to actually ask some people that I knew in my life to say, could you mentor me on some levels with some things I'm struggling with? And it opened up a whole other world to me. So for those of you who do professional things, even if you're not an entrepreneur, I want to encourage you to think about mentorship, because there are so many people that are willing to give you that time. And again, we're going to kind of rapid fire because we don't have too much time left today. And I want to get to a few of the last questions. But could you share, Justin, from your perspective, what are kind of some of your best practices for mentoring? Is there anything that you think people should avoid? Like, how did you choose the best people?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how brief I can be with this, but I'll try. So when I was getting ready to start my business, I'll go back real quickly. In high school, in middle school and high school, I picked up mentors who were educators or people I worked with in part-time jobs that I just bonded with. They kind of were doing the kind of thing I thought I wanted to do in my career. And I just it's mostly just like I'm a deeply curious person. I like to ask questions. I'm interesting. And I think a lot of people who are doing work that not a lot of people understand appreciate when someone's like interested in what they're doing. So I think that was just natural. Like, I would ask a lot of questions that I got like extra attention from one of my teachers in middle school, who was a technology teacher, and he was new to it. That he wasn't really trained in technology, but he picked it up on his own. So it was cool to him that there was a student who was super interested in the computer lab and wanted to spend extra time in the computer lab. So he became my first, I think, mentor to some degree. He was also a biology teacher, and biology was my favorite subject too. So I loved his teaching of biology. I loved his teaching of technology. And he's already now the superintendent of technology from my home county where I grew up. And I was in his first class out of graduate school, and he was teaching biology and technology at my middle school. And then in high school, I did a senior project with a mentor who I worked for the previous summer in an internship, and continued working with him after with my first business. But then when I was going to start my agency, I was working at the summer camp briefly in Pennsylvania, and the founder of it was a serial entrepreneur, very successful guy, very successful networker, very successful. He was a mentor. At this stage in his life, he was a full-time volunteer for nonprofits and mentor for entrepreneurs. And I knew that. And so I went on my way to befriend him and spend extra time with him, asking him questions about business. And he gave me some advice about how to build networks and how to build relationships and how to leverage them for business success, and also how to leverage volunteerism and community involvement to support to kind of be a two-way street. So after learning from him, I did more volunteering and looked out for opportunities for mentorship. And to me, every time I've had an opportunity to meet someone who I thought could be a mentor, it was because I saw a connection between their current path being like what I wanted to do, but they were way ahead of me. And so I saw, and I set the goal to impress them, do good work for them and with them, build their trust, and then have a casual mentorship relationship where if I needed something, I could go to them. So the first time that happened in the business was with Craig Madison, who was at the time was the CEO of Grove Park Inn. When got the chance to meet with him in my first month in business, I recognized that he was an entrepreneur on a path 10, 20 years ahead of me. And he had started an agency in Asheville. He had taken on big clients and he'd grown it. And then he got hired away by his largest client. And that's what he was doing at the time. And so I recognized that meeting him, I had an opportunity to impress him. I had an opportunity to pick up a big project and build a mentorship. And it worked. I don't know exactly why, but I just rose to the occasion of the opportunity to impress him and busted my ass to do good work for him and achieve the vision that I shared with him in that first meeting about what I thought I could do for them. And that impressed him. And that, of course, when he left Grow Park, he became a consultant and he brought us along to every project for like 2 or 3 years and was our biggest lead source, rainmaker, so to speak, which is what he was when he had his own agency. He was the sales guy and the rainmaker for them. And from time to time, it happens again. It just happened with Shift. With Shift, one of my colleagues and partners and one of my largest clients forwarded me an email that the co-founder of B Lab had seen one of our sessions and had forwarded it to a really impressive network and said this was the coolest session he'd seen this year on racial equity. And that was a session I designed. I was like, wow. So I could just let that go and take in the little ego boost from that. But instead, I took that email she forwarded me, I grabbed his email off of it and I emailed him. And I said, hey, I heard that you liked my session. I remember seeing you speak at this conference in 2015. It was really inspirational. I became a B Corp parsnip because of that. And can we meet to talk about Shift? I think there might be a role for you in the event. He ended up speaking, and now we're meeting next week, and there might be a chance for me to work for his new organization, like as a client, and maybe even like a mentor. He's really focused on racial equity, which is something I'm increasingly focused on. And he's been working on it for 10 years, like almost full time. And so he's a mentor in that aspect of what I want to be doing next in my career.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Trey, I'll throw in that if there's things that people want to avoid when it comes to mentorships, I know for me, there's a few things. One, I think it has to be values aligned, truly. I mean, you can, get a mentor that is, achieved all sorts of things, but if at the core, there's not a values alignment, I think that makes a big difference in how things are received. I also think that you have to just be okay when you reach out to mentors of getting a no. Sometimes people are busy, they have too much going on. I've reached out to people before where they weren't really prepared at the time to sort of mentor me on a regular basis, but I came back 6 months later and they had that time built in. And so not taking it personally. If the person's not available, that's okay. But sometimes, you think you have a lot in common with somebody and it's very surface level. So I encourage people always to go a little below that surface level with their mentors. And I do, again, just want to give Justin a shout out that that perspective on mentoring and adding that into my professional life as an entrepreneur really changed my world. It has just really allowed me sometimes to work through difficult things in a way that's just much less stressful because, as Justin said, I have people in my life who've accomplished things similar to what I want to accomplish. And they're willing to sit down and hash out some of the struggles or the problems, and they've already been through it, and they share my values. And so their approach to dealing with it is similar to me. They give me advice that I think has been super helpful.
That last part is key. And that's really the biggest value, I think, and that's also, I think, part of why it works. It can work both ways. I've had very few mentors that weren't business coaches that I had hired who I really kind of treated as a real mentor. I more treated them as a friend in business who I periodically met with, and occasionally I would reach out to them when I had a question, but I wouldn't reach out to them with a question. I'd reach out to them, can I take you to lunch? And then I'd catch up with them, how they were doing personally. And then toward the end of the meeting, I would ask the question that I came to get the answer to. I can remember doing that with trying to decide if I was going to buy the office or not. So I took Craig Madison out to lunch and we just caught up for an hour. And then I was like, hey, I have this opportunity. Do you think I should do it? Here's the details. And he was the perfect mentor to ask about that because he actually made more money in his career from all the real estate he bought with his business than his businesses. He's retired off of the real estate, not the actual earnings from any of his companies.
Yeah. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. If there's any other questions, and Trey, we are going to touch on the last thing that you submitted to the Q&A. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to drop them in now. But I want to sort of rapid fire between you and I to answer a few things here at the end. So my first question is, if you could only use one marketing tactic, what would it be?
It depends on the project, but generally I'd say partnerships. Partner-driven educational content. Webinars, virtual events. But that doesn't work for every business model. Other than that, I think digital advertising, if the right type of digital advertising is often a good fit. Not always, again, not always, but.
Yeah. No, I wanted to throw that question out there because when I thought about that question, I realized you and I would probably actually at this point in our work together have the same answer, which for me, it's the same thing. It's the networking and the partnerships. I've seen so many big wins out of that part of how I approach my companies with the JV Media Institute, but also with the other company I own, Creative Original, where, really the people around me are so integral into my success. And the people who can help me get in front of multiple potential customers are really the gold that I have, right? The people who can get me in front of a lot of people who are potential customers and the people that I know really believe and trust me as a professional and as a leader. Those people, I feel like they're the ones that have helped me really generate some bigger growth. What is the number one or maybe number 1, 2, 3 pieces of advice that you have for new entrepreneurs? What do you tell people when you're talking to them?
That's a good question. I think it's a little bit situationally based.
I was gonna say, think about it for a minute. I'll jump in because I know what my key things are. And this just goes to Trey's question about balance and how he says balance is a moving target. How do you kind of integrate dealing with that issue? And I think my number one piece of advice for all entrepreneurs that I meet, especially when they're new, is what's your day off? Decide what day it is and stick to it, because that's going to be the first thing that goes as an entrepreneur. Is you're going to start working 7 days a week. You're never going to come to an end of your to-do list. You're never going to get to finish everything in a day and clock out. And if you're not careful, at the very beginning, you have to say, I'm going to take Saturday every week to myself, and I'm going to step away, and then I'm going to come back, because to me, part of that balance has to be refreshing yourself. Right. I also think, and most of us, I think, have already dealt with this, but money mindset is really important as an entrepreneur. It's easy to get caught up in all the emotions we have around money. And so, that's something I've worked with my business coaches on over the years, is just being comfortable with money, understanding that it's energy that we exchange, having a more positive relationship to it than the one I was raised with, which was, very, you go to work and then you die, was kind of the working class idea I was given. So I had to really release some of that to continue. But anything else you want to add, Justin? About balance or just advice for entrepreneurs?
No, I don't know. I'm not drawing anything immediately, but a couple things sort of popping up to mind. One thing that I know I've noticed, and this I think is a result of just doing it for 10 years, is it's kind of like you do build a entrepreneurship, like basically decision making in business is something that is a skill you build over time, and I know you kind of have to, because as you get things get more complicated, if you take the same amount of stress and energy and time you put into making decisions in the beginning, you will just burn out. You will not be able to do it. And there's also a certain amount of confidence in a business that is, like most, goes through cycles of doing well and not doing well, and big wins and losses and challenges. I think you get to a point where you're more comfortable with the harder times and the discomfort times. Like last year, we were doing really poorly for 6 months, and there was a part of me that wasn't sure if the business would survive. but I didn't have the same amount of stress as I would have a couple of years earlier if we were going through the same kind of a financial struggle, because I built up a muscle, I guess, or muscle's a weird way to, it's a common way to describe it. I don't think it's a very good way to describe it, but it built up like maybe it's a confidence, and partially it's built on the quality of the team and their resolve and resilience and hard work and feeling like we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, which doesn't come easily. That takes systems and culture to get there. And we had been putting a lot of work over 3 or 4 years with Matthew on systems and culture. So we were resilient because of that. And so I don't want to say it was all me, that my confidence was what kept us going last year. It was more the resilience of the overall organism that is the company.
Well, yeah. And on that note, I just want to say, like, thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your journey with us today and just talking so openly about everything. I definitely feel like what you just touched on was really important. In the sense that you get better and better at being an entrepreneur over time. You are going to be much better at it, hopefully, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years than you are right now. And a lot of it has to do with that decision making. And what I feel is so important for not just entrepreneurs, but especially the teams we build, which is that emotional intelligence piece, really being able to see people, really being able to understand the emotions that are coming up inside you and inside other people, and to make decisions that are, healthy and balanced and good and lead to growth of the company, while also really honoring the people that you have on your team. So yeah, and Trey, I see that comment just about resilience of the organism or the organization. Yeah, it's such a huge part of what we've all learned, I think, from the last year. So I know we're right at 1 o'clock. Thank you all so much for joining us. And again, Justin, as usual, it's always a pleasure to have these conversations with you. I hope you all will join us again for our digital drop-in in June, which we are really excited about because we will have Rand Fishkin from Moz, but now also from Spark Toro. I'm really excited to have him joining us next month, but have a great rest of your week. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.